Hi there everyone, welcome back to Dandelion Delphi Tutorials. Today we're going to have a look at global variables. So let's just start off by working out when do we need to declare global variables. Let's say I want to count the number of marks entered. Remember I said we're going to use our program that we created in the previous lesson. So I want to count the number of learners and I'm going to use a counter. iCount is assigned to iCount plus 1. So every time the button is clicked, 1 is added to iCount. Then to calculate an average, I will also need something called a running total. And this is this line here. We are adding up the current value that was calculated or entered with the click. And we're adding that value to a running total. This is like taking your marks for a test and adding all your marks together to calculate the average. So now I have what I need to calculate an average, but here follows some rules, and Delphi is all based around rules. We have the counter as well as our total that is appearing on both sides of the assignment statement. So what we need to do is we need to initialize these values. So that is true for both iCount and our total. And for now, until you know for loops, we are going to go to Form1 Activate and we are going to initialize these variables. Now what initialization means is I need to set the values to a certain initial value. And for now, we're going to just set them both to 0. Now comes the next rule. I'm now using iCount and our total in two procedures. So one is for the button where I'm doing these calculations, and the other one is in Form1 Activate where I set the values to 0. So these variables now, because they're being used in more than one procedure and they are holding the same value, we now need to declare them as global variables. Global variables are declared at the top of your program where you see private. And under private, I am declaring an integer iCount and our total a real variable because it's adding up real percentages or real marks. You will see that there's no var after the private, and we can just start declaring our variables as usual. Now comes the next rule. Once I have used this space to declare a variable globally, I may not redeclare this variable as local variables in the procedures. If you do declare them again in a button or in Form1 Activate, they will lose their global value and you'll go back to 0. We are now often asked to calculate an average, and this is often done in a different button. But because our total and iCount are both global variables, I can use them now in a third button. So here I'm calculating the average. RAVE is my local real variable. Remember in the previous lesson we learned that when I'm using the divide, this variable needs to be of real data type, and it is calculating the average for me. It is only being used by this one button, so therefore it is locally declared. And here's my output as I would display the summary for the values entered so far. Now is your time to practice. So in the button click of our example program, I want you to add the following. I want you to count the number of clicks, so using iCount. And I also want you to have a running total, adding together the percentages that you calculated of all the learners. Remember then to initialize and to declare as global. Once you have done that, you're going to add a button called Summary. And in this button, I want you to calculate the average percentage, display the number of learners, and the running total in neat columns. Before you start with setting up the neat columns, I'm going to explain tab stops to you. So wait before you press pause. So produce these neat columns. We might want to change where the default tabs stop. So there's a few steps that we need to take to set up our tab stops correctly. First of all, the setting up of tab stops have to follow the dot clear if there is one, as your dot clear is also going to clear your setting up of your tab stop. The next line here, richedit.paragraph.tab count, is indicating to us how many tabs we would need. So usually what I do is I first add the headings to my rich edit, separating with #9s, that will produce a tab space, and seeing how many #9s that I need. If you look at this line of code, you'll see that I need 2 #9s. So therefore my tab count that I set up before this heading will be assigned to 2. Now I need to say, where do I want these tabs to stop? And we start with the first tab. The tabs are indexed. Remember, the square brackets indicate indexes or position number, and the tab 0 is the first tab. And I want it to stop 50 points from the left of my rich edit. The second tab, would be tab number 1. I want this one to stop at 100. Both of these values here are calculated from the left of your rich edit. So your first tab will always be smaller than your second one. And if you had a third one, that would be larger than your second one, as it measures from the left and where does this need to start. Here is just an example of my rich edit. Where does this tab stop? So from the left, measured up to 50, this is where tab 50 stopped, and this is the second tab, this is where 100 stopped. So now you can try and complete this button here at the top, as well as your summary button, and see if you can produce the output as in this screenshot. When you are testing your program, you will enter the marks 50 for the first click, 40 for the second click, and 20 for the last click. And once you click the summary button, then your output should look like this. Press pause and I'll soon show you the memo. So here we are back into our program in the button click. And the first part of the question said you wanted to count the number of learners. That's what this line is doing here. And then you wanted to calculate a running total so that you can later on calculate the average. So I'm adding each learner's percentage that I calculated in the previous lesson. I'm adding that to my running total. Now remember, my rule said if a variable is on both sides of the assignment statement, it needs to be initialized. This is true for both iCount and for our total. So both needs to be initialized. And for now, we are going to initialize in form_on_activate. And here's form_on_activate. iCount is assigned to 0, our total is assigned to 0. And remember, now that we're using these two variables in more than one procedure, so I'm using it in procedure for form_activate, and I'm using it here in the button click, I need to declare both of these variables as global variables. And you'll see that they are not in the local variables as well. They are only declared up at the top under private as global. So here's the declaration for the two variables. There's no var. iCount is an integer as we are counting, and our total is adding percentages, so therefore it needed to be real. Last part of the question is asking me to go to the button summary, and here I'm calculating the average. Our average is real, and I'm taking the running total divided by my counter. I need to set up some tab stops, so I'm clearing. I need 2 tab stops because I have 2 #9s, and the first one I've set at 80, and the second one needs to be higher than the first. Now I'm just displaying the heading summary and an open line, and the labels that are at the top of these columns. And here I'm displaying my global variable, iCount, my local variable for the average, and then the total as well as asked by the question, separating these with #9s. The last part that I want you to do is add the code for the retry button. So what must happen when I click the retry button is all these objects must be cleared, including my rich edit, and I want the cursor to be placed in the edit box for the name. When retry is clicked, your form should look like this. Now press pause and try it yourself. Here is the answer for the reset button. So all these edit boxes have a method that performs a specific task, and it is .clear, and it clears the edit boxes for me. And set focus places the cursor for me in the edit box named EDT name. I then clear my rich edit, and the next rule that we need to follow, anything that you have placed in Form on Activate, you want to copy and paste here inside of your reset button. So I'm clearing the rich edit, but I still want today's date to display and contact list and an empty line. And I also want to start a new group to calculate a new number of learners and a new running total to calculate a new average. I suggest you go back into the video or in my textbook and make yourself some summaries of the rules to follow for these global variables, because they will apply now until grade 12. Also remember that you can't just watch videos, you have to practice. Thank you for watching. Hope to see you soon.